How the people are doing. So, the S25 Ultra. See, this phone has a lot of people riled up about all the stuff that's been going on with it. Mainly because it is believed by a lot of people, and I was one of those people, initially at least, when I saw it, that on paper, the S25 Ultra, it didn't have anything interesting going on. Like, when you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, the design changed ever so slightly, a few millimeters here and there, and then that's basically it. But the fact is this, there have been certain upgrades, it's just that they've not been showcased nearly all that well. Like, for someone who's interested in cameras like me, and I'm gonna presume most of you guys are as well, mainly because you're watching one of the most detailed camera comparisons on YouTube, I guess. Well, if I do say so myself, I at least hope it is. But the fact is simple. If you are interested in cameras, then the S25 Ultra actually has a lot more to offer as opposed to Samsung's previous flagships. And I say that because I've used these features and they are bloody interesting. They are things that you expect from certain other devices, certain other Chinese devices that tend to promote a lot of flexibility, but not from Galaxy devices, until today that is. So there's definitely certain things here that have been improved upon, that have been tweaked so that the choice goes to us. And that is something I'm excited about, and that is something that most people do not talk about, which is very unfortunate because it is one of the most standout features, in my opinion, on the S25 Ultra's cameras. Let me get into it. So right here, what you're looking at is very simple. We have vivid colors on the X200 Pro, and of course, the good old-fashioned regular scene optimizer situation with the S25 Ultra. This is the default of the default settings that you can have. But the S25 Ultra has so much more to offer now. That's the beauty of it. Because just like the X200 Pro has 3 very distinctive profiles, the S25 Ultra gives you a slew of very different profiles, and all of these are kind of stylized and maybe not for everyday usage. Like this one, I think it's called Breeze, at least if I'm not wrong. You probably can see it on the screen, but the fact is this. You have stylized profiles like the textured mode on the X200 Ultra and the Breeze profile right here on the S25 Ultra, which are drastically different in the way they approach things. But in my opinion, when it comes to regular day-to-day photography, when you're just shooting in auto mode and you're shooting JPEGs particularly, I think I speak for most people when I say that we want natural looking photographs. This is precisely why I like the X200 Pro's Ice Natural Color so much. It is my favorite color profile on the X200. This is also why I like Leica Authentic so much on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, because at the end of the day, these will provide very natural looking shots. And then most of the time, that's just the way I want it. If I want something a little bit pushed, I can do that for a minority of images. But you see, up until the S25 Ultra, we were forced to basically utilize the regular color profile, the vibrant, processed look with their color profile that Samsung has always done with their Galaxy devices, and we didn't have options. Now we do, because basically you can make your own filters. Need I say more? This is very similar to the photography styles that we have on the iPhones. It's exactly the same. This is very similar to what you can do on the Vivo X200 Pro as well. Like, the way I do it is I reduce the saturation and I increase the contrast. That's all I need, that's all I care about. On the X200 Pro, you can actually even reduce sharpening. That's a whole another step of flexibility and choice that you have on the X200. The S25 is not quite there yet, but it's very close. It allows you to have personalized shots. That right there, in my opinion, is by far the greatest upgrade that the Galaxy devices have ever had. However, that does not quite solve all the issues that Galaxy devices have had. The S25 Ultra really likes to neutralize warm tones. And that's a huge problem for me, because personally I love shooting in sunsets. So if the warm tones are removed during a sunset, well, then that kind of ruins the whole mood. That kind of takes out the juice from the image. Kind of makes it look bland. And that's something that you're seeing right here. As you can see, a lot of the shots, they come out looking very nice. The dynamic range is tremendous on the S25 Ultra. In some cases, it's even better than the Vivo, but the Vivo maintains the juice, the warmth in the scene, and that's very accurate, and it also looks tremendous. And now for the ultra-wide camera, and look, I'm more than certain that you're thinking that what if we were to just warm up the color palette, right? We can do anything we want with the colors, so why not warm it up? In general, that should solve the problem, right? Well, not exactly, because you see, in a shot like this where we don't have warmth in the scene, it's perfectly balanced on both phones. There's really no issue here. But had I warmed up the color tones or the filter, that is, then this scene would have been artificially warm and it would have looked unnatural and the colors would have been off, to say the least. So that's the issue, because white balance and color accuracy with the warm tones, they need to be adjusted dynamically, and the Vivo X200 Pro does that almost perfectly, almost every single time. I'm not saying it's perfect, nothing is perfect, but at the end of the day, the S25 Ultra will always remove the warmth. This may not be a problem for you, but it is a huge problem for me because I love shooting in warm tones. That's the thing. Now, I'm sure you may have noticed by now, I'm only talking about the white balance and the way the S25 kind of suffers in that regard. The reason is that across the board with the main and the ultra-wide cameras, I've noticed not a singular other issue. Yeah, maybe the S25 Ultra kind of sharpens a bit more, but it's very minor and you can rarely even tell the difference. Even on such a large display with such high quality photos, I can hardly see a difference here. But with that said, let's talk about macro photography. Now this is interesting because this is where I think the X200 Pro is possibly going to be the absolute best this year. Unless the X200 Ultra comes out, or some other phone comes out that can do this just as well, if not better. But the fact is this: macro photography with the telephoto cameras. This is something the S25 Ultra is sorely lacking, because I had honestly expected something like that to just be the case at this point, but we still have to use the ultra wide on the S25 Ultra. You might be thinking, well, it's getting so much closer to the subject, so why am I saying the X200 is better? Well, you see, by itself, the 3.7x telephoto is not able to get as close as the S25's ultra-wide camera for macro, but you do get an obscenely high quality 2x sensor crop for macro photography. And that basically puts it on par in terms of how close you can get to the subject, and the quality is flawless. But then of course zoom. Now see, this is where things are going to be very interesting, and this is where we are going to start seeing some major differences between the two. Because for the 2x sensor crop, when we crop in all the way to 500% to check out the details, as you can probably tell, the X200 Pro is not particularly good. There's a good reason for that. The main sensor on the X200 Pro had a bit of a downgrade in this particular generation. I'm not sure why, it just happened and it doesn't really turn out particularly well. However, the S25 Ultra, as you can see, especially if you look at the writing, it's doing a tremendous job, isn't it? Let me assure you that's all processing. I can say that because if you look at the leaves, and this is exactly why I took this kind of shot where we have two distinctive areas where we can assess details. The leaves look processed all the way to high heaven and then back. It's just... But look, to be honest, AI upscaling and processing of this nature, over-processing I should say, has been a bit of a problem in Galaxy devices for quite a while now. But well, what about the 3x? Because you see, this is where we have a whole slew of different problems. Because as you can probably tell, the contrast is completely off. And furthermore, when we crop in all the way to 500% on both phones. Now, it doesn't surprise me that the Vivo X200 Pro has significantly more detail. It's because the 3.7x telephoto on the X200 Pro is by far easily one of the best telephoto cameras that we're probably going to see this year. However, the S25 Ultra, well, as you can probably tell, not only does it look flat as all combined, it also has nowhere near as good of a quality. It's just the 3x is still complete and absolute trash, and there's nothing we can do about that. However, the 5x on the S25 Ultra is actually fairly high quality, especially compared to that poor little 3x that we have. But, as you can probably tell, the issue with flattening out telephoto images, it is very, very obvious. And it is something that has plagued Galaxy devices for a very long time, because I remember having an issue like this on the S24 Ultra as well. I'm very surprised that they haven't fixed this yet. Like, they made so many good changes. Why not fix a very obvious and blatant issue that we have here? And would you look at that, there's a very good reason I said the 3.7x telephoto is the best one out there, because even against a very good and high quality 5x on the S25 Ultra, we're getting more detail and less sharpening and less grain on the X200 Pro. Now obviously I'm sure that a good amount of this is processing, but the hardware does count. It's the amalgamation of the two that allows for such a beautifully high quality image. And then just to drive home my point, I've got a 10x right here. So here's the deal. It was very hazy, as you can probably tell, very hazy and overcast, which is why both of them look kind of flat. Well, the S25 looks significantly more flat as opposed to the X200 Pro. That's because the X200 at least tries to give you contrast, unlike the Galaxy. That's just nature of the beast. And yes, cropping all the way into 500%, the X200 Pro has more detail. It is processed, obviously, I can see a lot of processing in there, but compared to the S25, it's doing a better job. However, when it comes to high res, things are going to be a little bit more interesting, because you see, with the main camera, the S25 Ultra does have quite a significant resolution advantage. so to speak, 4 times more resolution as opposed to the X200 Pro, and I believe the sensor quality might also be higher. Don't quote me on that, I'm just guessing here, but well, the images will speak for themselves. Well, they do indeed, because as you can probably tell, the S25 Ultra, even with the bin down 50 megapixel mode, it is doing a significantly better job. It's not even a comparison at this point. That's one of the other issues that we have with the X200 Pro. You see, the issue is that because of the sensor downgrade on the main camera, we have had problems with specifically the 2x sensor crop, which we saw wasn't as good, and also the main camera high res. This is definitely not nearly as good as the S25 Ultra. The 2x was a bit of a mixed bag because of just how much the S25 processes, but with the main camera, it's a no contest. And that very fact is further exemplified by the S25's 200 megapixel mode, which I am elated and proud to say that it finally produces an image that is distinctively better than its very own 50 megapixel mode. That wasn't the case for a very long time, by the way. The 200 megapixel mode always felt like a disappointment, to say the least, but not anymore, because the amount of detail that you have now is quite something. This is easily one of the most detailed main camera shots that I've seen in a very long time. Oh, but we are not stopping right there, because finally, we have high resolution and a significantly better sensor with the ultra-wide camera. Well, as it turns out, it's actually really good. Like, I expected it to be worse than this. Now, there is overprocessing. If you take a look at the text, especially the Splendor text, well, I doubt you can even read it because it's really processed and the AI is kind of messing it up a little here and there. But the fact is this, the ultra-wide camera, when you get this much detail, even with the help of processing, it's still very impressive, and it is definitively better than what the X200 is producing, right? Even with a smaller field of view, it's not able to produce nearly as much detail, so it's kind of a win-win on the S25 Ultra. It took them 4 bloody generations to do it. I wonder how many it's going to take them to upgrade the 3x telephoto, which is, at this point, as we have established, it's kind of trash. I mean, that camera doesn't even have high res, which is precisely why I'm just directly going to compare the 5x 50 megapixel mode on the S25 Ultra versus initially the 50 megapixels on the X200's 3.7x. And as usual, we are cropping all the way in. Now, it is a 5x or a 500% crop on the S25 Ultra, but we are matching the framing on the X200 Pro, which means this is around a 750% crop. There's definitely issues going on both. Now, on one hand, I would easily say that the S25 is doing a better job when it comes to 50 megapixel mode specifically, because even though it is processing things a lot, it is still looking really nice and significantly more natural as opposed to the X200 Pro. There are artifacts, obviously. If you look at the text, it's very obvious that there's some artifacting going on there. The X200, however, too much over-sharpening. Doesn't really work out. However, just like the main camera on the S25 Ultra, Vivo decided to give us 200 megapixels with the 3.7x telephoto. I think it's one of the reasons why it's so bloody good. And when you crop all the way in, almost all of the artifacting and the sharpening that we saw previously is gone. And it looks basically perfect now, which is just such a big deal, because if you think about it, up until now, whenever you thought of 200 megapixels, we always thought of those as gimmicks, because we didn't really get sizable, distinctively better results when we used 200 megapixels. I mean, I'm sure you can see the trend at this point, right? There's definitely things that have been improved, but it's just that most people don't really know about it. But having said that, what about selfies? You see, selfies are kind of interesting. So the S25 Ultra, it has a normal and a warm preset when it comes to selfies. I feel like I should have gone for the warm preset because it kind of looks desaturated for the most part. But the reason I feel the S25 Ultra is going to take an easy lead is because the Vivo has a very odd tendency, or rather I should say an inconsistency, to just blow out highlights on your face. And particularly, it affects the highlights only on your face. And well, that doesn't really work out for me, especially because the face should be the priority in a selfie. That's the whole point of taking a selfie. And that right there is actually a huge problem, because the S25 Ultra, even though sometimes, yes, its contrast is not quite as nicely balanced as the X200, and it might desaturate skin tones as well, but at the end of the day, the dynamic range is perfect, and you never get blown out selfies, at least as far as all the selfies that I've taken thus far. Now, this inconsistency further confuses all of us, because when I took this backlit selfie portrait, which is supposed to be the hardest selfie to take, when you think about it, Well, the X200 Pro is producing a perfect shot. There's nothing wrong with it. It is absolutely and exactly what I could have ever hoped for. Because as you can tell, the S25 Ultra is the one that's struggling here. A dilemma indeed. But oddly enough, Vivo decided to remove night selfies on the X200 Pro. And the S25 Ultra on the other hand actually has really good night selfies, some of the best out there. But the lighting situation in this, like, I really have a way of selecting some of the most ridiculous situations to take these shots in because, man, both are struggling a lot. The S25 does have much higher detail, much better sharpness overall, but the colors are wacky to say the least. Anywho, let us now move on to portraits. So, when it comes to the main camera portraits on the S25 Ultra, it turns out really nice, as you can probably tell. Slightly lower contrast than I would personally like, but I do gotta admit, the X200 Pro does look like it's pumping the contrast a little too much in certain scenes. It's not bad, but I would like something in between the two. That would be perfect for me, for my personal tastes. However, one little issue that I have is that it doesn't have a 35mm mode. Like, the One X camera is more than capable enough of handling a 35mm crop, right? It's just, I believe it's like a 1.5x zoom that you gotta do. Why don't we just have that option? However, we do get a 2x or a 50mm shot, and I gotta say, it does look like there's a bit of smoothing happening on the S25 Ultra. The Vivo actually avoids it quite nicely, which is impressive to say the least. However, when we go to 3x, now this is where the X200 just simply takes the lead. And this is also why, even though I'm not the biggest fan of how these particular portraits turned out, like the X200 Pro's portraits are tremendous in general. It might be because this was an overcast situation or something like that, that it kind of went a little too crazy with the contrast, but at the end of the day, if you can't even legitimately utilize the 3x and the 5x for portrait shots in particular, which benefit a lot when you take zoomed in portraits, well, then it kind of becomes useless, doesn't it? Especially on the S25 Ultra. Like, these are genuinely some of the worst zoomed in portraits that I've ever seen. But well, let us move on to night portraits. And you see, this is a place where I think both phones can excel, but I also gotta admit, the lighting once again, ridiculous. And I gotta say, the purple light in the background looks very accurate on the S25 Ultra, but the Vivo, it's just going crazy with it. Like, I don't even know what's going on there. And given the circumstances, both phones were performing really well, but I did take this particular shot. And yes, on one hand we have the X200 Pro, which is giving this weird teal look in the background, which makes no sense whatsoever. Like, that's obviously not how it looked. It was just white lights on the mosque, very similar to what the S25 Ultra is doing. But if you notice on the S25 Ultra, you'll see that there's this weird green artifact seeping in from the sky, and that's a problem, to say the least. That's an inconsistency that can happen on various night shots. Now, speaking of night shots, let's take a look at regular night mode. So this is with the main cameras, and with the main cameras, I gotta admit, the S25 Ultra is very well optimized. It is looking really good, especially because it is kind of nailing the nighttime look. Now, it could be because there are some street lights and general lighting going on all over the place, but as you can probably tell, it's not trying to overly brighten up the shadows, overly brighten up the night sky, and give us this weird blue tinge that a lot of phones do. Even the Vivo phones used to do that before, but both the Vivo X200 Pro and the S25 Ultra have improved upon this, and I'm so glad that they did. However, there is a bit of an issue once again on the S25 Ultra, and this is exactly what we saw with the daytime shots. The white balance, or rather the lack thereof. Actually, the lack of accuracy with warm tones, specifically. Once again, when I took these shots in slightly warm lighting, you can tell that the X200 is preserving it very well. The S25 Ultra is finicky with that. With night mode at least, I've seen that certain times it can give you some warmth, although it's a greenish warmth that doesn't look as pleasing or as natural, but there will be other times when it'll just completely remove all of that warmth altogether. But having said that, the X200 does have certain weird issues that just popped up, as you can probably tell once again. Very teal colors with the white lighting, which again, it makes no sense. This is the first time I'm seeing something like this. And I have taken shots with have white lighting in there with the X200 and I've never noticed this before. Also, with the purple lighting, for some odd reason, the X200 just cannot handle it. The white lighting on the mosque and the purple lighting on this thing, it's just completely unable to handle those lights. Everything else is perfect. The warm tones are perfect on the X200 Pro through and through. Sometimes maybe a little oversaturated in certain instances, but for the most part, it looks tremendous. However, with the ultrawide cameras, I think the situation is one and the same. Basically, both phones have very nice quality and overall they look really good, but the S25 will completely and utterly remove warmth from the scene, which is very unfortunate because a lot of shots that I took were in warm lighting and they just look very sterile. unnecessarily sterile. Like this shot in particular bothers me a lot because it is much wider on the S25 Ultra. It looks really nice, but the character is completely removed along with the warmth, and that, just simply put, it doesn't work for me. However, with zoom, things are going to be a little bit more interesting this time around, because at night, you see, the results will differ a bit, to say the least. So right here we have the 2x sensor crop. We're cropping all the way in, and yes, the colors look absolutely ridiculous. I mean, just look at the difference in the way the sky is represented. Like, I don't know why it happens, and it specifically happened for the white lighting. Nothing else. Everything else was perfect except for this. Makes no sense. But overall, the detail preservation, I would say, is pretty much the same on both. Maybe a little bit more sharpening on the X200, but it's a very minor difference. With the 3X on the other hand, I think we all know exactly how this is going to turn out. So let's crop all the way in. And just as you would expect, the 3.7x telephoto on the X200 Pro. Just an absolute blockbuster camera, and it speaks for itself. And then finally, we have the 5x on the S25 Ultra. Now, in general, traditionally speaking, we have almost always seen night mode prefer optical zoom when it comes to detail preservation. And well, in this case, with the X200 Pro, it seems to be quite the exception, because it is actually producing more detail and less noise as opposed to the S25 Ultra. The colors are still completely off, but the detail preservation on the X200 Pro, it is worthy of so much praise. And with that said, we are at the end of this comparison. So here's the deal. The S25 Ultra, it has certain issues, obviously, like the white balance problems. That's the one thing that stuck out to me more than anything else. I would say the second issue would be the fact that 3x and 5x, regular telephoto shots, portrait shots, they all turn out exceptionally flat. It's very unfortunate that it happens that way, but well, that's just the way it is. And once again, this was with a high contrast filter that I enabled. It still turned out horribly flat. So I can only imagine just how low contrast the 3x and 5x would have turned out had I just used the regular default option on the S25. But with that said, the filter that I was able to enable, it feels like an insult when I say that it's just a filter. It's so much more than that. It is the personalized color profile. That's the best way to put it. A color profile that you can tweak exactly as per you want. And this is something that the X200 Pro also has, just so you know. You can do the very same thing. You can even go further with reducing sharpness or increasing sharpness if that's the way you want to roll. I'll go for it. But at the end of the day, you can get the exact style of colors that you want to a fair degree. Now, something like the white balance issue, which needs to be adjusted dynamically on the software end, that's not something that we can do anything about. If we increase the warmth, it's going to unnaturally increase the warmth in everything. And that's not going to work out, almost ever. But the fact is simple. The fact that we have this beautiful flexibility, it is quite something. And honestly, that is one of my favorite things about the S25 Ultra. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to make a good few more comparisons, hopefully. So with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, found this helpful, because I sure as hell did. I didn't really expect it to be this good, and I didn't expect this level of flexibility. That, honestly, if you know anything about me, you probably understand why I'm so excited about this. Flexibility, customization, especially with the cameras, it's a big deal for me. And the fact that we are just moving towards it more and more, even with the iPhone, just as with the S25 Ultra, it's honestly such a pleasure. With that said, I'll see you guys soon with more. Cheers.